You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome, everybody, to the Barbell Logic podcast. I'm your host, Niki Sims. I'm the CXO, Chief Experience Officer over at Barbell Logic, and an exclusive strength and nutrition coach. With me is Andrew.
Hello. And in person.
In person. Well, Andrew, just real quick, he's the Chief Operations Officer, the COO at Barbell Logic, also the product manager for Turnkey Coach, also an exclusive strength coach and nutrition coach.
Correct.
Yeah, we are in person today. This is really different.
Yep.
Usually we sit in different rooms, sometimes in the same house, and record over a website called Riverside. And that kind of, I don't know, maybe you have also gotten Zoom fatigue.
Yeah, for sure.
Just like staring at your computer all day. So since we actually really enjoy talking to each other in the same room,
yeah,
we're testing this out. We're actually at the same table. Andrew's penetrating gaze. It's unescapable.
I'm also at like energy level 10 out of 10 right now.
Why
because
is that?
I've actually slept reasonably well for the last week and a half or so, eating well. And I'm actually took a little break from alcohol like we talked about last time. Yeah. And I think it's just, I'm highlining right now. So,
and you just had a really good workout.
And I had a great workout, just squat 195 kilos, 430 for 5,
nice.
Deadlift triple at 475. So that's still kind of not quite at like where I used to be, but things are moving in the right direction. My back is cooperating. Just feeling great today. It's Friday.
It's Friday. Yes. Man, it's such a different training life when you go into the gym without like a pain obstacle.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm feeling like I can be aggressive at the bottom of the squat and breaking the plates off the floor for the first time in years. Every other time for the last 2-3 years, going down on the squat, I'm just sort of like bracing for what it's going to be at the bottom, or not sure if something's going to just tweak or pop. And then the deadlift, that transition point between the quads and the hamstrings is still a little tentative. I'm still not quite able to finish the deadlift, but that's going to be the next kind of milestone, I think, is when I can really finish the deadlift aggressively.
Like your lockout is?
No, it's right at that transition point between using your legs to break the floor or break the plates off the floor, accelerate through the shin, kind of that just below the patella where the hamstrings and the hip extensors start kind of taking over. It puts a little bit more on the back, I think, and my low back and my hips where the legs aren't quite as dominant. That's where it starts to feel like,
Interesting. But it sounds like it's coming.
It's moving in the right direction. Yeah, for sure. The weight's going up. The RPE's going down. So
yeah, that's a good way to look at progress.
Yeah.
I forget. What were we going to talk about today?
No idea.
We got so excited about our new setup.
Yeah. Like we were just going to look at each other in person and see what happened. I don't know.
It's a different channel. Well, we had thought about one thing that I tossed out there was kind of like there can be many different pathways to take a program, to take your training, and what it would look like, say, on like 3 different types of, maybe 6-month journeys of, okay, I'm going to compete, in the next few months, or competition's totally off the table. I want to, air quotes, just train, I don't need to hit any PRs, or maybe one where you're maybe like coming out from a setback or dealing with an injury. But they're like, those are 3 different seasons, which call for different types of training. That'd be neat to kind of talk about what each of those can look like.
Okay. Yeah. How would you program for season 1, peaking for a meet? So
someone who's getting ready for a competition, a 6-month window is really nice because you don't have to start preparing for heavy singles 6 months out. Even if they're pretty new to lifting or if they're more advanced, like you still have a phase that I would call like a building, more high volume phase. You don't need to practice pause benching yet. The squat and the deadlift don't really need to change in terms of like a competition lift versus a training lift. Whereas the bench press, I'd probably keep touch and go bench press in there for a while. So I kind of keep training with the focus of building intensity upward, knowing that like the focus is getting more weight on the bar over time. Like we need to get more weight on the bar over this set amount of time. And it's more like 6 weeks out, maybe 8 weeks out that I start introducing doubles and singles, get some exposure to it. Definitely start getting pause bench press in there for sure, like at least a month out and training that for heavy singles. But like all the chips are in for getting more weight on the bar for heavy singles. And I think the one thing that sets you apart there is that heavy singles become important. And those aren't as important, in my opinion. They have a place in the other two seasons. So that's kind of the overview where the further away from the meet you are, the more kind of normal rep range you're doing. You're trying to get sets of 8, sets of 5, sometimes sets of 3 in your training. As you get closer within the 6-week range, it looks a lot more specific to a competition. So I'll usually have like heavy squat and heavy bench press on day 3 or day 4. That is like when the meet's going to be, if the meet's on a weekend. I'll have like those two on the weekend and I'll keep the heavy deadlift on Wednesday because I let that taper for longer. But it starts to look more like that in the last month of training.
Do you at any point do a mock meet where they are doing heavy squat bench deadlift on the competition day, if it's a Saturday or a Sunday, for example? Like put the singlet on and try to recreate those conditions?
I definitely have done that with the singlet before. I don't usually have them do squat, bench, and deadlift on the same day. I have found that the deadlift does well with more time recovering.
Mm-hmm.
So they can practice the heavy singles and stuff, but I actually keep the deadlift separate from the squat and the bench press.
Just had a one-on-one with my coach, Nick Hammer, also a Barbell Logic coach.
And really, like, that guy competes. He runs meets. Like, that's a competition coach.
He's actually the state meet chair director of all of USAPL for North Carolina.
Sorry, meet chair. Just really funny.
Meet director for all of North Carolina.
That's cool.
And he has a trailer with every piece of equipment he needs to run for a 2-platform, 130-person competition.
Holy moly.
And drives up with the trailer, unloads racks, weight. Like, I think he said he has 8 racks that he uses for the warm-up room, the platforms, all the weight, everything. Hires 8 judges so he can have 3 plus 2 floaters so that people can rotate, loaders that are running the entire day. And it's like he can drive up anywhere in the country and set up a meet. Hotel, it doesn't have to be a gym. I ran strength lifting meets for like 4, 5, 6 years, but I was always dependent on finding a gym that could host it and had all the equipment. It just blows my mind talking to him, like how much detail he's managing to run these things. And he personally, like you said, competes at least once or twice, I think, a year. I think his work has been a little bit busier, so he hasn't in a while. But anyways, the point being there that I was having a conversation with him yesterday during just one of our one-on-ones. And I asked him this thought experiment because we were talking about deadlift frequency and kind of what you're alluding to, needing more time to taper. I asked him, if you squat 2-3 times a week for a year, do you think you could still show up and pull a good deadlift? Maybe even if you were training hard and your squat was at peak numbers, do you think you could show up and pull a
without training the deadlift?
Just pulling, just squatting 2-3 times a week, never deadlifting. Do you think you could still drive progress on your deadlift?
I bet he said yes.
He said yes. Flip that though. If all you trained was deadlift 2-3 times a week for a year, could you show up and squat anything reasonably heavy?
Oof, imagine how awful that first empty bar set of squats would be.
No, is what I would say, just right off the bat. And so point being to what you were getting at, I totally agree that the deadlift frequency and the exposure to a really heavy deadlift is much lower priority. The one thing that I would say that I have found to be useful about doing a full SBD day during meet prep is the psychological aspect of showing up to pull heavy after having done a heavy squat and bench, and just having that full day of lifting and the adrenaline having to ramp up a couple of times, I think can be useful to practice, because I think sometimes people get, they expect to be able to show up and pull a deadlift on their 3rd attempt after a full day of powerlifting. as if it were in the gym, on a training day when all they did was pull heavy.
True. It's the first thing of the day is a deadlift.
Yeah. So like their expectations just kind of get set at a unreasonable level, or maybe not what's practical to expect on a meet day. But otherwise, I agree, not having everything all in one day is a good thing.
The meet day is, man, that's a big day. When you look at your program, you're like, oh, I just have 3 heavy singles in each lift.
Oh man, no.
But no,
it's exhausting.
It's a 12-hour day.
Just I find being in the room with that many people at that energy level is totally exhausting.
Yeah.
And your adrenaline kind of having to wave.
Yeah.
If you're not used to that, it can be
it's a drain.
Very exhausting, which I think is difficult to prepare for. Like it's just a unique environment.
Yeah. What about you? What's your general overlay of meet preparation?
I think pretty similar to what you described. The further away you are from the meet, the less specific it is, the more advanced the lifter. I think the further into the prep you can be non-specific. If you're dealing with a beginner, I might actually be doing competition lifts the entire 6 months leading up to it. And you're basically just doing whatever their normal programming is. A more advanced lifter, 3 to 6 months out, could be doing all kinds of variations that are still increasing with intensity and volume. And then you kind of hit this tipping point somewhere in the 2 to 3 months out where you've got maximum stress in terms of both high intensity and relatively high in volume. And then for those last 2-3 months, become more specific with your lifts, put in the competition lifts and the singles, like you said, practicing the skill of executing a high intensity lift, pulling back the volume gradually. And then that's when it also, I think, starts to become more specific to the individual and understanding how different people respond to volume for the different lifts. Some people do really well with higher volume, lower intensity of one lift or the other. Some people do better with maintaining high volume. On the bench especially, I've made the mistake of tapering too quickly or too early, I should say. Each lift seems to need a little bit different degree of tapering. The bench almost seems like you got to maintain relatively high intensity.
You have to have real workouts
right up till that day. Almost like up till like the Monday before.
Yeah.
If you start taking a break, it seems like of having the weight in your hands, it's heavy. It just doesn't seem to carry over well. Whereas the deadlift, I've done the opposite. I've peaked too early, like a week or two before, and it seems like everything's great.
Yeah.
But then you're not pulling off enough stress.
Yeah.
Like a client will hit like a 3 RM, maybe even a 1 RM, small 1 RM, like a week or two before the meet. And early in my coaching would be like, yes, everything's great. But then now I realize that's usually not a good sign.
Yeah. There's more like definitely a lot of, well, let's see how this goes now, because you can't have a trial day and know that you're just going to add 5 pounds to that trial day.
No. Yeah.
It's different than that.
There's a lot more on the line.
Yeah.
Squat seems to sort of be in between.
And especially depending on if like the lifter, if they're stronger at their squat, like if that's their lift, they're going to, I think, deal with the most kind of physiological stress for that than the deadlift. Because I've had some lifters who's like, based on like their body type or something or an injury, like they're going to lift more weight on their squat. And then, so they might be wiped out for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I think being strategic about how heavy or how much grinding you want to do on your squat is definitely something to keep in mind. Because I've had somebody get excited about the lift in isolation, go for an all-out grinder on the squat, and then they're just done for the rest of the day.
Yeah, no matter how many Sour Patch Kids or Celsius you drink.
Or shots of whiskey you take for the deadlift.
Just get tired.
But I think that's a strong argument for keeping conditioning in your training in that 6 to 8 months. We haven't really, or 6 months out. I don't think we really talked about that, but I think that a strong argument for keeping your conditioning up is that you need to be able to recover in a relatively short period of time and prepare for the next lift.
So have to noodle on that one.
Certainly, just like with the volume on the other lifts, you need to pull back on that. But I think having some of that zone 2 kind of conditioning involved in your program for that last 3 to 6 months and leading up to that even, I think is worthwhile.
So totally different than someone who says to you, I don't want to compete. I just want to keep training and it'd be cool if my numbers went up. but I'm not interested in competing.
Would you say that's where your program is right now?
Yes.
So how is that? How are you approaching that for your training?
Well, the format then becomes more, and I have to say, mine's so different because I'm doing one barbell lift. The rest are like a belt squat and leg press, machines, accessory stuff. For following that goal and not doing the barbell, I want to go in and be able to work hard, to not hurt whatever it seems to be nagging me, and be able to tell that I'm building muscle. And what that entails is, for me right now, it's 2 upper body days, 2 lower body days. I've decided to do a split just because.
Would you say that's different? Jumping back to our first example, would you do something similar, or are you pointing that out because it's different than what you would do for the peak?
No, I think I
Still an upper lower split?
could do that. Closer to the meet, I would probably go with I might even move to a 3-day training week from a 4-day training week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Peeling back in volume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But with this one, the important thing when you're training, because you want to enjoy training, you make it work for your schedule. I love training, so I wanted to train 4 days a week. And, I want to go in and know that I'm working hard, I'm building muscle, I'm not losing everything that I've gained, which, there are trade-offs there, but it's more like getting into a series of movements and a schedule and a time frame for the workout where I just get to go in and do a lot of reps and feel like I've worked really hard. And then over time, gradually see that I still look jacked and maybe even have gotten some more muscle. It's not objective unless I'm measuring body parts. It's definitely a bit more subjective. But I probably make that a bit different with barbell training. The weight on the bar it's less of a driver and becomes more of an indicator of fatigue, where it's okay, if we're still training and your numbers on everything are going down, we might be doing too much or maybe not enough. But usually I've learned so much more now that less tends to be more. So if we keep going, and I'm just so indoctrinated that more weight on the bar equals good, that I can't help but always have that in the back of my head.
Right.
Or just pay attention to the PRs on the summary.
Right.
So that becomes less of, whatever we have to do to get, 3 RMs and 5 RMs, and more of how's your form looking?
Mm-hmm.
How's your bar speed looking? How's your body feeling? Do you feel like you can do more? Do you feel like you're getting buried? Do you hate these movements? Becomes a lot more of, let's keep you doing big bang for your buck movements.
And you have hit some objective PRs recently, right?
Yes.
Speaking of measuring body parts, you have talked about your goal of making your butt bigger.
To make my butt bigger, and I did.
What is your objective measurement
just
PR?
Measured my butt in at 41 inches, and my waist did not grow as much as my butt did.
Congratulations.
So I think that's big. And my butt, I think, is also taller, which is really cool. I didn't measure that from the top to the gluteal fold or something.
Where didn't we have a post on Slack? I think Brooke actually posted something about measuring the upper butt, the
she
mid
measured
butt,
the
and the
high
lower
hip
butt.
where ladies tend to hold a lot of body fat, right under the belly button. Yeah.
Okay. I thought, something like that.
Anyway, that was my one objective driver that I have noticed changes in. And my pants are tighter in my legs, so I feel justified.
I am also in the training phase, I would say right now. In fact, that's exactly what I told Nick. I've been running, I don't even think it's fair to call it Texas Method, because if I say Texas Method, a lot of people are going to assume, 5x5 and 1x5 kind of thing. But it's more of that, a volume day and an intensity day structure, which is, I think, at the heart or the intention of Texas Method of sorts. But we've been doing it for 6 months. And he said, it might be fun to do a peak or taper and see where you're at. And I'm like, nope, I just enjoy training.
Yeah.
And every time I taper and peak, I feel like ass.
A turd sandwich.
I feel like that'll be a non-bleeped version of what I feel like. I feel like a turd sandwich for a month or two afterwards. And it's just
And then there's the expectations you put on yourself, I better get a new 1RM.
Yeah. And I'm just like you, I enjoy training. I don't feel the need to see the weight going up on the bar every single week or even every session or every other session. I do like to see that trend over time.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly monitoring that progress.
Pay attention to it.
But it's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes. And what we talked about that I've been really kind of blending strategies after working with Jordan Stanton for a year on using velocity-based tracking of bar speed with an actual tendo meter, that I kind of have adapted that to the Texas method, where volume day, instead of the volume day always needing to constantly ratchet up, I'm looking for the volume day to stay within a range of weight, roughly 70 to maybe 80% of a target 1RM, or, I don't really call it an E1RM, but I've kind of got it in my mind that I want to be in striking distance of a 500-pound squat.
Okay.
If I were to taper and try to, do a 1RM. So then my training loads for volume day, I'm aiming for 70 to 80% of 500 pounds for multiple sets of 5, 6, 7, or 8. And I'm also looking to maintain a bar speed and a technical proficiency that those sets are being productive for predominantly the purpose of getting more muscle mass. So I really want to keep it in a range where I'm able to stay in good position, really feel myself using my legs, and not get into the survival mode of squat morning my squats, which 2 weeks ago I did. I was getting close to a 3x5 PR, or at least a recent 3x5 PR. And I was like, it'd been feeling good on volume day. I'm going to throw a couple extra pounds on there, pushed it up, and I got it, but I was not in good position. And we're talking very subtle difference, but it was enough that my low back was just kind of smoked. So
Which made deadlifting,
the intensity slot of my deadlift was wiped out, that I just couldn't finish it. And even though I got a 3x5 recent PR, I considered that a counterproductive volume day. I want that, like you said, I want my training sessions to be productive in terms of working the muscle groups effectively, getting the most out of that volume that I can. And then the intensity day becomes a skill, like a practice day, where I'm keeping myself in touch with putting more like 85 to 95% kind of weight on my back or in my hands, feeling the heavy weight, practicing that skill, because it's different. The movement is different. It feels different. The balance point in your foot stays the same, but the diagnostic angles change as the weight gets significantly heavier. So it's just kind of a different movement at that point. So,
and you also couldn't do that high volume 2 days a week. Like, the intensity day is necessary in the sense that it's a not volume day.
Yeah, it's a different stress for sure. Yeah, and it doesn't feel like a session that beats you up, even though like you kind of get in, get out.
Yeah.
But the priority, I think, for people that are in that season of just training is, I think, very spot on with what you said, that you're wanting to keep the stress and the intensity in a level that is at the edge of your zone of discomfort, but it's got to be heavy but doable, if you will, but not so heavy and stressful that you're feeling beat up all the time.
Yeah.
That's just not sustainable.
Yeah. And it's got to be calibrated to what's going on in life.
Yes.
That might be a phase where there's a new baby and, you would love to train 4 days a week, but this is going to be a 2 days a week
for sure
season. Or sometimes people can be all in on training. And when they're all in on training, they're also all in on nutrition. And they might be less all in on nutrition some of these phases. And there just really is such a difference when you're eating well versus when you're not eating well. And you have to kind of calibrate your training to expect a little less output if you're not really feeding yourself like you could be.
What I like to do with clients and when I'm in that stage, is to program a little bit more conservatively and or give the client or myself a little bit more wiggle room on the assignment. So for example, on volume day, I'll steer a little bit more towards the 70% range that I was talking about, the bottom end of the range. And I'll say on volume day, if you're feeling good this particular day, add reps. So it might be 3x5, but add up to 3, 4, maybe even 5 reps, because it's such a conservative program.
You want to get close to that.
Get
edge.
Closer to being an RPE 8, but don't go much past reps of 10. Almost nobody wants to go past sets of 10 on a squat, at least.
No.
Anyways, and then on intensity day, I will tell them, stick at the weight, but if you want to add or subtract 10 or 15 pounds, If you're feeling really good and you want to add another 10, 50 pounds, go there. If it's just not there that day, pull it off.
Yeah.
But I want to keep the volume relatively
I
low.
like that, because if they're not eating and sleeping very well, they won't be getting to a point where they've gone too hard on their training day and they won't be able to recover very well for the rest of the training coming up. Because when your resources are compromised, your recoverability is also compromised. So if you go just ham on a workout, you were going to be punished for it. But I like the parameters you set there, because you still get to play with what you have available that day. You know, maybe you did get a good stretch of sleep.
Yeah, sometimes it feels good.
I'm going to do more and you'll be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
3 was recovering from an injury.
Yeah. Some kind of setback, which I think we could pick something.
I mean, back is the one that's always on my mind right now. And it's common. I mean,
it's common. Yeah. I was talking to a client of mine. She and I both have read, and I think you've read this too, not all of, but part of Healing Back Pain. And one of the author's points there is that it's really correlated to what's going on in your life. Your back will feel a lot of life stress. Especially in the absence. There may even be no indication of any tissue, muscle, bone injury at all. And yet our back is spinal. Another interesting statistic that we were talking about is like most people experience back pain between the ages of 30 and 50, or people who are going to experience it. Most of it occurs during those ages. And then after 50, it tends to really go down, which is interesting.
Yeah, which I've also seen is the range that people are feeling the most stressed in their life, generally the least happy.
It's like when babies happen and teenagers happen and parents get sick.
Work is maxed out.
You get fired. Like it's when like high impact.
Maximum
like flourishing, and sometimes even that can get to a point where you're
even good
in like a midlife crisis.
Sure.
Yeah.
Even good stress is stress.
And your body doesn't really know the difference.
Right. Yeah, I certainly can relate to that, having recently been struggling with back pain over the last 3-ish years, over 3 years, that magically seems to be resolving itself right as I'm finalizing a divorce.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of interesting how how that works.
It's pretty big.
But
yeah, and that's why it's, I think, important for us to talk about, because that's in the stage of life where a lot of our clients happen to be as well. And it just comes up when you have a back, it happens. Like it's living and having a spine. I think it occurs, and especially trying to be active. So there are people who come in having dealt with, you know, having been dealing with back pain for a while. And then you have like the kind of acute occurrence of, man, I was doing a squat and something, you know, felt like a pop or a snap, and now walking is hard. So I think there are 2 different ways to adapt to training based on what has just occurred. For the person who's been dealing with pain for a while, I have found that they've gotten really used to dealing with pain. And I have done a lot of trial and error, mostly error, where I'm trying to get them back under heavy weights as soon as possible. And I can't really think of many instances where that's worked well, to be honest. It seems to not give whatever's going on enough time to fully leave the picture. And so we kind of just recreate that stress over and over. They get more used to it. They forget what it feels like to feel good. And we keep reinforcing this kind of mindset of, well, I just need to get strong again. And you kind of start driving in a direction that I don't think is conducive to being pain-free.
do you notice that when you do that, there's certain weights that you just keep getting back to?
That
and it's
totally
like
has happened.
the thing.
Yeah. And I think we were talking about that before, where it's like, oh, here's the injury where I hurt myself before, and boom, it happened again. You were 2.5 pounds away from it a week ago, and it was fine.
Right. Oh, and and everything's crushing it. You're like, all right, we did it. We solved it. And then 2.5 pounds more.
Yeah.
And I tweaked my back again.
Yeah. I think if you've been dealing with it for a long time, you have to try something quite different, where the goal isn't more weight on the bar. It's like more time in the gym, feeling good, and you're ready for more. And like, that's the check. And when I worked with Becca during my back issue period, she was really good about reminding me of that, because I was always like, no, I need to be strong again. I need this. And she was like, well, how's your pain? Like, how's this? And so I think that is a really important driver. And so you might need to be really creative with how you create effort during the workouts. And then if it's someone where it's like a funky, like weird tweak thing, like you just had something on one of your squats.
Oh, my rib
Your
thing.
rib thing.
Yeah. That one was just well, deal with it, put the weight back on and let it get back into place or whatever. I don't know if I just popped it out or
Wolverined your way through that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an example of a tweak where sometimes you do just get back to it. You know, I just basically loaded the squat up with as much weight as I could tolerate, and the pain was kind of in that 2 to 4 out of 10, and it just kind of faded out over the last month.
Yeah.
2 months now already.
And that's the good skill. I was listening to, I think it might have been the Barbell Rehab podcast, where the movement where it occurred, or another movement, like if it happened on a squat, you might feel like on a squat or a deadlift. And there is probably a baseline. If it goes up and kind of stops at like a 2 or something, then okay. But if it keeps going as you keep progressing in your workout, that's too much on that day.
Yep.
And then you kind of do another assessment 24 hours later and 48 hours later. And you really want it to be back to baseline 48 hours later. And if that occurs, then, keep going.
Yeah, I tell people that if the pain exceeds 4 out of 10 during the workout, or if it's getting worse after the workout, like you said, if it's not resolving, I even shorten it up. Like if there's symptoms that are carrying on after the workout, that was probably too heavy for the day. If there's mild symptoms during the workout and it's feeling better afterwards, we're good.
Yeah.
Like we hit the sweet spot there. Because a lot of times with back or knee stuff, I notice that lifting actually makes it feel better.
Yeah.
And that's a golden sign.
So true.
And so I'll try to keep people in that range. If it's a reoccurring or a chronic, especially back thing, what I've tried to do lately is spread the stress out over a longer period of time. So often I'll find that it's with clients that have been doing a lot of heavy low bar and deadlifting, lower body slot or session kind of a day. And I just simply by taking their program and spreading it out over several weeks of heavy, light, medium seems to just kind of dissipate the stress. So instead of just adding 5 pounds week over week on the deadlift and or the squat, I'll make the deadlift and the squat kind of overlap in opposite ways so that the heavy squat days with the light deadlift on 1 week on their lower body intensity day or what have you. And then the medium days kind of line up, and then the heavy squat, heavy deadlift, light squat match up.
Yeah.
So, and I've definitely found with the over 40 gentlemen that spreading the stress out over longer periods of time, I've been able to get past those kind of reoccurring tweak weights, and they're able to just keep training more effectively on the long run.
And always monitoring, how is your life outside the gym?
I have so many.
How much are you having to...
Especially the neat dads where like, I'm expecting because everything's been progressing as normal, and then they show up and just completely turd sandwich their workout. And I'm like, what happened? Oh, well, I remodeled my bathroom this weekend. And I'm like, or I had a client who's like event planner. And I'm like, what happened? She's like, oh, well, I was up till 4 a.m. I got 26,000 steps before midnight, and I'm feeling a little run down today. Okay. So some clients are a little bit better about giving you a heads up, and others just expect to be able to like plow through that. But
this reminds me, my friend told me this funny kind of comparison. She was comparing it between men's brains and women's brains, but I don't think I would generalize it to that extent. But she compared some brains to waffle brains and other brains to pancake brains. So waffle brains, you put a little butter and syrup in this compartment.
Okay.
Don't put it in the other one. Put it here.
Okay.
Like this little compartment is lifting.
I
this
always
little compartment is training.
Prefer to syrup. When I had Eggo waffles back in the day, always make sure syrup fills every square.
Yeah. Smart. And then the pancake brain, everything's everywhere all the time. So like that's a waffle brain thing where it's just like, well, my life is completely maxed out and there's no way it'll affect the training compartment of my waffle.
Oh, gotcha.
It's just
They're
compartmentalized.
just very compartmentalized.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas the pancake brain is just like, yep, it's all on top of me right now. But yeah, it can take a while to learn how life can impact your training and how training can impact your life in both positive and negative ways. So my thought there was like, if you are adapting your life around this nagging injury, like, the tripod where you lean down to pick something up and you're like, oh, let me put my elbow on my thigh here, or just like,
that's I thought that's normal, right?
It feels like
There always need to be 3
Like,
points of contact once
yeah.
you're over 40.
putting your lifting belt on to sneeze and like sleeping funny. Like, it might just start letting that kind of seep into your life without realizing it and being like, you gotta draw the line somewhere and be like, no,
Yeah.
this isn't acceptable anymore. But yeah, 3 different tracks. It can all happen to a training life. I think it's happened to each of our training lives. You make little adjustments, but except for me where I'm on a little bit of a departure right now, you keep doing the same movements.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, at a macro level, bending your knee, you're bending your hip, you're bending your elbow.
Yep.
But your exercises have varied a ton. Don't you think? The exercise selection that you have now is totally different than what it was before.
Right. That's what I mean. Is like, I'm on a bit of a departure in terms of the actual lifts right now. But like in each of those 3 categories, you're probably going to be doing the same things.
Really?
Squatting, benching.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, at a macro level, but there's like within the category of squat, there's however many different variants of the squat you could be doing. Safety squat bar, high bar,
Right.
front squat,
totally.
pause squat, tempo squat, deadlifts could be rack pulls. I mean,
Goblet squats.
yeah, I would say, just like we talked about with the peaking, the further out away you are from competition, the more variation you're going to see. If you're in a training only zone, you could be all over the map. You need machines, but yeah, at a macro level, you have to be bending your joints and doing heavy but doable stuff. But I think that that's one of the things that, again, not so subtle plug, a coach can do for you is help you figure out, or have experience with a broader set of exercises and variations that you could try mixing in.
Yeah.
Because sometimes just doing a different exercise can help address some of those things. Like for me personally right now with training, I have been just this week experimenting with squat variations that have less load on my low back so that my low back's a little bit more fresh going into the intensity day. So just knowing which variables you can play with and still have the productive training that you're looking for, I think that's a bit of an art as much of it is a science.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're curious about what that would be like, I highly recommend an experience call because on that call, you can upload videos of what your lifts look like. We talk about your program, all the answers that you search for on the internet. We will happily sit there and answer them for you. So if you want to check that out, go to barbellogic.com/experience. And if you got some value out of this episode, we'd appreciate a review or share. And we hope to be with you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.